Confirmation that Canada has now filed a complaint with the World Trade Organization over the new U.S. tariffs.
Canada has made a bold move in solidifying its economic and diplomatic ties with Europe, signaling a shift away from its reliance on the United States. Over the past decade, Canada has strengthened its trade agreements with European nations, eliminating tariffs and increasing exports. The growing alliance between Canada and Europe is not just about trade, it is a direct counterbalance to the economic unpredictability coming from Washington. This shift became even more evident when President Trump imposed a hefty 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports, directly impacting Canada, Mexico, and Europe. European leaders expressed deep regret over the decision and warned that they were considering countermeasures to protect their economies. Justin Trudeau called the tariffs completely unacceptable and warned that they could strain trade relationships. The looming threat of a full-scale trade war pushed Canada and Europe to accelerate their cooperation, strengthening economic ties and taking a united stance against protectionist policies from Washington. While Canada and Europe were forging new trade paths, tensions escalated in Washington. A diplomatic meeting between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky turned into a heated argument. What was meant to be a formal discussion about granting the United States access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals in exchange for continued support in its fight against Russia turned into an aggressive confrontation. Trump, visibly frustrated, accused Zelensky of not showing enough gratitude for American assistance. He insisted that Ukraine had little leverage without support from Washington and needed to be more appreciative. Sitting beside him, his vice president reinforced the stance, arguing that Ukraine's diplomatic approach was ineffective and that more effort was needed to push for peace. Zelensky refused to back down. He made it clear that Ukraine could not afford to gamble on vague promises and needed real security guarantees. He reminded Trump of a past agreement he had signed with Vladimir Putin, witnessed by Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel, which had failed to provide the stability Ukraine desperately needed.
Так, ми не робимо ніяких кроків назад. Це наша політика бути послідовними. Незважаючи на те, що сталося раніше, незважаючи на це, ми конструктивні.
He questioned what kind of diplomacy Washington was proposing, given that previous peace talks had led nowhere. As tensions escalated, European leaders wasted no time rallying behind Ukraine. A leading European diplomat called for a stronger global leader to step up, subtly expressing disapproval of Trump's stance. European Commission leaders praised Zelensky for his resilience, calling him a symbol of dignity and courage. Macron took an even stronger stance, condemning Russia's actions and emphasizing that Ukraine needed not only military aid but also strong sanctions against Moscow. The Italian government called for an emergency summit between the United States, European nations, and Ukraine to address the crisis. Across the English Channel, the United Kingdom reinforced its commitment to Ukraine, vowing to stand by Kyiv. Trudeau echoed these sentiments, reaffirming Canada's full support for Ukraine and stressing the importance of solidarity against Russian aggression. If you are finding this analysis insightful, do not forget to like this video. Your support helps us bring more in-depth content on global affairs. But Ukraine was not the only point of contention between Washington and its allies. Diplomatic rifts were widening not only over Ukraine but also over economic policies. New digital service taxes introduced by several European nations targeted major tech giants such as Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon. This prompted immediate retaliation from Trump, who accused these countries of unfairly targeting American businesses. As the world marked 3 years since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, international leaders gathered in Kyiv to reaffirm their support. However, Washington's policy was shifting. Instead of rallying behind Ukraine as before, the administration was pushing for a swift end to the conflict, raising concerns among European and Canadian leaders. Canada's foreign minister revealed that members of the G7 were working on a unified statement reaffirming their commitment to Ukraine, but Washington was reluctant to frame Russia's role in the war as aggressively as before.
We could see an end to this war tomorrow if Russia decided to stop its illegal invasion of Ukraine. On Friday in the Oval Office, President Zelensky pointed out,
this growing divide made one thing clear. While Canada and Europe were determined to stand by Ukraine, the shifting stance of Washington was causing significant friction. Meanwhile, another unexpected storm was brewing between Washington and Ottawa. Trump's comments about Canada had been raising eyebrows for months, but they quickly escalated. He claimed that the United States had spent hundreds of billions propping up Canada with no real benefit and openly questioned why Washington needed to maintain economic ties with its northern neighbor. In a series of heated statements, he went as far as suggesting that Canada should become part of the United States, insisting that it would lead to lower taxes, better military protection, and no tariffs. His remarks sparked outrage across Canada, triggering a wave of grassroots activism. People proudly wore clothing with the phrase "Canada is not for sale" in defiance of Trump's words. Trudeau, initially dismissing the comments as political bluster, later revealed in private conversations that he suspected Washington was interested in Canada's vast mineral reserves. He believed that the idea of Canada becoming the 51st state was less about political unity and more about economic control. As if trade tensions were not high enough, Trump officially imposed heavy tariffs on Europe. During a fiery cabinet meeting, he announced a 25% tariff on imports from Europe, arguing that the continent had been exploiting the United States for years. Macron immediately condemned the move, warning that Europe would respond with tariffs of its own. Germany, already struggling economically, braced for impact and warned that these new policies could severely slow down growth. While some European nations sought diplomatic solutions, others like Italy considered taking individual action to mitigate the effects of the tariffs. Despite escalating tensions, Canada continued to push forward with its trade diversification strategy. Beyond Europe, Canada's efforts to expand economic ties with other nations were paying off.
We are actively engaged in ongoing conversations about trying to make sure that these tariffs don't overly harm, certainly in the short term, certain sectors.
A few years earlier, the Canadian government set a goal to increase non-American exports by 50%, and so far they were on track to meet that target. Trade agreements with Indonesia, Ecuador, and other growing economies demonstrated that Canada was serious about reducing its reliance on the American market. Beyond trade, diplomatic tensions between Canada and Washington continued to rise. Trump's aggressive stance on border security led to new immigration restrictions that directly impacted Canadian citizens and businesses. Many Canadian officials saw this as an attempt to pressure Ottawa into aligning more closely with Washington's policies. At the same time, Trump's administration revived the controversial Keystone Oil Pipeline project, leading to widespread protests in Canada. Environmental groups and Indigenous leaders accused Washington of disregarding Canadian sovereignty. As trade wars escalated and tensions between allies reached new heights, the world was entering a new era of economic and geopolitical realignment. With Canada and Europe stepping up to challenge Washington's aggressive policies and stand by Ukraine, the global balance of power was shifting in unprecedented ways. Whether this realignment leads to lasting partnerships or further divisions remains to be seen, but one thing is certain: the diplomatic battles of the year 2025 are far from over. If you have made it this far, make sure to comment your thoughts below and share this video with others who are interested in understanding global politics. Your engagement helps spread awareness about these critical events.